Welcome to the pod before the pod, where we get to the meat of the matter. And the thing I'm so excited about today is that my little show, Hold It with PM Jen, is almost at 5,000 downloads. I cannot believe it. I launched this thing a year and a half ago. I'm at like 34 or so episodes. And being so close to 5,000 downloads is incredible to me because and it matters because I really do believe that buy and hold real estate and enabling people to successfully hold real estate through several real estate cycles enables everyday Americans to build the kind of generational wealth that actually creates freedom for yourself and your family. And I don't mean the kind of freedom where you just sit back all day and collect checks. I mean the kind of freedom where you're able to choose environments where you do provide your work, the people that you surround yourself with, and what you choose to pursue, which is so very important to me. So thank you for listening and downloading. And if you want to take just one more teeny tiny step to help a baby creator like me out, rate, review, and subscribe wherever you're listening or watching. It helps so much with the algorithm of it all. It helps the world find us. Another way you can help me this week is I hope you'll let me know if you are or you know somebody who is investing in real estate, ideally residential rental real estate, through a self-directed IRA. Self-directed IRAs are something that I've been aware of for a very long time. However, I don't meet a lot of people locally in my practice who are using them and doing them. And this is somewhat selfishly motivated because I think in 2026, my household will be opening our first self-directed IRAs, and we will be directing that money into real estate more than equities like we traditionally have in those particular accounts. And so I'm looking selfishly because I want to meet people who've done this, but I've also met a really incredible partner I'm going to be recording with, and I want some more stories from people who've done it. You might have also heard this referred to as a checkbook LLC within a self-directed IRA. Those are the key terms. Listen for if you know anybody doing that. Send them my way. I'd love to chat with them and maybe feature them on the podcast. Back to this podcast. The reason why I started it is because I have this mission of educating people, but a lot of people don't know that this really comes from my experience as the broker and owner at One Focus Property Management. And I shouldn't say that. I think people understand that, but they don't understand that we're absolutely available for hire. And so if you are in North Central Pennsylvania, that is Lycoming, Clinton, Montour, Union, or Columbia counties, and you have residential real estate, One Focus Property Management is your perfect partner. And I know sometimes you hear the commercials, but that's what we're doing all day. And this studio is located in a very busy property management office based in Williamsport, Pennsylvania. I just wanted to make sure you knew we are real and live. And if you call us up, you'll get to talk to me about managing your property. Thank you so much for joining me for yet another episode.
Razzle dazzle, we're the best. No, the courts aren't on your side, but they're not on the tenant side either. Jen, like you are independently wealthy when you are naked. I am over treating property management the same as real estate sales. I guess I'll lead the witness. I think it's freaking scammy. Welcome to Hold It with PM Jen, the show for real estate investors who buy and hold forever and ever. Amen.
Welcome to Hold It with PM Jen, the show for investors who buy and hold forever and ever. And today I have a very interesting episode. See, somebody who listens to me and knows me in real life, is a good friend, said, you know what, Jen? I can't buy and hold forever and ever. What else can I do? And I said, I don't know. I only know this. I'm a one-trick pony. I just buy and hold it forever and ever. And my friend said, no, this isn't going to work. So today we have a really great episode. My friend Walt is with us. Walt is 81 years old, has had a very successful career, is enjoying his golden years, but had some rental real estate that he didn't want to die with the deed to. And he's going to share with us his story today. Walt, why don't you give us a quick hello?
Hello.
Thank you so much. Walt is truly bi-coastal, enjoying his life both in California and in Pennsylvania for the last several years. And that's how I came to get to know him, is because he now makes his home nearby us. And I also brought in Sabrina Richards. Now, I've known Sabrina for quite a few years. She's an exchange officer with 1031 Exchange Corp. And her company and her have been very participatory with my real estate investor meetups and bringing this education to investors. She's an expert in the options you have for how you can exchange your property, deferring taxes on those sales and things. Sabrina, give us a quick hello.
Hi, everyone, and thanks for that. Yes, it is defer.
It is deferred. And Sabrina, like I, wants to give you just a little disclaimer. We are not working for you. We are not your tax planners, your lawyers, your realtors, any of that. And so what we're doing here today is simply having a discussion around Walt's story, the possibilities, and how we serve clients every day. But for advice about your situation and all the unique complexities of that, you're going to go find one of those tax experts, or maybe call Sabrina and share with her your situation and start a professional relationship there. All right, let's get started. Walt, I've painted you as a bi-coastal success story with a problem that was bugging you with this property. Tell me about why holding this property wasn't working for you at this stage in life.
Okay, so let me just tell you about my era as a landlord. And eventually at the end of that, I became disenchanted and I came up with 6 options to get out of it, or maybe not. So the landlord era began for me in 2010. It was a duplex, 2-bedroom, 1 bath in the front, 3-bedroom, 2 bath in the back. And I did everything. I researched, made my own contracts, rental agreements. I selected my tenants, did everything.
In 2010, why did you do that, Walt? What was the goal in buying that property?
Actually, I picked it up in another way. It was I inherited it.
Okay, gotcha. So you inherited the property. We call that becoming an accidental landlord. And when that happened, it sounds like you were really into the idea of operating it and you were doing it and participating pretty actively, right?
Carol and I, my wife of 51 years, and I, when we were, before we got our first home, we lived in 10 apartments in 10 years. And I had a lot of exposure to landlords. And I thought, I could do better than that. And initially, I had a lot of fun with this. Like I said, I generated my own legal documents, sought and screened my own tenants. We had a great time.
Cool. Okay. And
now,
so,
in 2015,
so that helps me understand like the state of mind you were in because you were already late in career or retired by that point, right?
Yeah, I think I was retired.
Okay.
I was working on it. I was not quite retired. I had to fix it up. When I inherited it, the one tenant in the front, my mother had lived in the back. She died. The tenant in the front moved out a couple months later. So I just totally revamped the place. It had termites. I bagged it and used the Vicane or whatever it is.
Okay.
Redid the floors front and back. They were hardwood, but covered by wall-to-wall carpeting, which was strange. There had been a leak in the front and it had bowed, so redid everything. Spent months on it.
And so it sounds like you had a pretty good ownership experience, but then when did it change for you? When did it change from like blessing to burden?
Okay, so in 2015, we started living half-time in Pennsylvania. This property was in Mountain View, California, San Francisco Bay Area. And I quickly realized that for me to perform my duties as a landlord, I may have to buy an expensive flight, go back. When somebody says they're moving out, do a move-out inspection, and then hang around for whatever the time period is to confirm, they did what they're supposed to fix so they get their deposit back. And I didn't want that exposure. Plus, at the time, I was considering international travel occasionally too, and I wouldn't be able to come back really.
Right.
So I looked for a property manager. Now, when I was fixing up the place, I replaced the fences all around the house. And the property behind this unit was a apartment complex, and this fence faced their parking lot. So I had worked with the management of that apartment, and I liked them. Well, he also did property management. So I went with him because I had an experience with him.
Okay.
The owner of the company was just fine, but he eventually handed off to a guy that was just awful. So I had to get a new property manager. So in 2018, I got property manager number 2. This one was really lucky because I was referred by a family friend who was giving them business for lots of units, like 10 units. There was an apartment, triplexes, homes, all kinds of stuff.
Okay.
So they were kind of a whale for this management company. And so they gave me some pretty good, a pretty good deal. And the guy who was the VP of this operation was a guy named Phil Lopez. This guy was great. He did every Wednesday, they had a process improvement meeting. The contractors that they sent around were really excellent. And the service was really good. I mean, they just fell all over themselves all over themselves to give you anything you wanted. Well, Phil left in 2020 and the place kind of fell apart to the point where in January of 2022, I had come back. There was an issue. I don't think we have them in Pennsylvania, but in California, in the Bay Area, there's a thing called roof rats. And what they do is they get into the crawl space underneath and go up to the attic through plumbing vents and stuff like that, and they hang out. And for some reason, they like hanging around in the attic.
Okay.
But anyway, I had fixed the place up so it was impervious to roof rats. None could get in. And this unit had crawl spaces, a crawl space for the front unit and a crawl space for the back unit, and each had a crawl space cover, which I had made myself, and they were tight. Nothing could get in. Well, they said they had roof rats. I said to the management company, please get them eradicated, get rid of them, and make sure all the crawl space covers are tight. Okay, we'll take care of that. And I contacted via email a couple of times. Are those crawl spaces tight? Oh, yeah. I just was there the other day and I checked and everything was fine. Well, I came back and I looked at the place on January 2nd, I think it was, of 2022. And the crawl space was ajar. A small dog could have got in, let alone a rat.
Oh.
And it was just the final straw. The back unit had been vacant for 6 months, 9 months.
Oh.
Now, in their defense, this was like the back end of COVID, and they were having trouble getting guys in to work on the place and stuff like that.
Okay.
But I took a hit on vacancy. I took a hit on them telling me one thing and not doing it. So I just had it.
Right.
So around January of 2022, I decided to get rid of it. And by April of 2022, I was out of it.
Interesting. And that brings us to kind of what, like your options, right? So it sounds like the first option of the 6 is to keep holding it and put a property manager in charge of it. And
let me go through
twice.
the sequence. Let me go through the sequence, Jen, that I actually had. Okay. First was an outright sale. I was really pissed. I was willing, if I had to take the capital gains hit, which would have been significant, on the order of $300,000 for capital gains.
Okay.
This thing had been held for 12 years and probably had appreciated 100%. So it had doubled in value.
Interesting. So although when you inherited it, you likely got it at a step-up basis, that because you're in a high appreciation market, you had a lot of value build up on the equity. Got it.
Yes. And 100% over 12 years, just straight line is 8% a year. That's really nothing there. You can get 15% a year.
Yeah.
So anyway, so there was an outright sale. That was distasteful because of the capital gains. Plus, I'd still have to do something with the money. It's not like I'm done. The next one would have been an installment sale, also called a seller carryback, where the seller finds a buyer.
Yep.
And most of these buyers would have cash, so they don't care. Fine, if you don't want the whole amount, I'll pay you over some, whatever, 3 years.
Uh-huh.
So it's, say, a third down, and then the second year, a third, and the third year, a third. Whatever it made sense to do for tax avoidance issues. It'd be a complicated transaction. I'd need a CPA and probably a lawyer. Like I said, you probably need an all-cash buyer. And I still need to figure out what to do with the money when I'm getting it. Also,
well, and it
if the
doesn't
buyer
completely
defaults,
eradicate
I get it back.
your tax burden. You're just instead of taking it all in 1 year and being at that higher bracket, you're breaking it down so that you can hopefully over time have less of a burden, right?
Yeah, I'm finding a path of less pain because of the brackets I would end up in.
Got it.
State income tax brackets are 0%, 15, 20%. There's a thing called the net investment income tax. That's at 3.8%, at least it was then. There's depreciation recapture, and then there's the long-term capital gains. So, I mean, I'm figuring that's about 30%.
Right. And I'm sorry, Walt, to interrupt, but, on that note, that is an avenue that you can use in a 1031 exchange when you are doing seller financing, and you also can combine it with the installment sale. So that is a strategy that can be utilized in a 1031 exchange as well that people could explore as an option.
I wish I had known that. I don't know if it would have changed what I did, but that's good to know. Good input. Thank you, Sabrina.
I want to just paint where you're at. Like, Walt's got this property. It is not working for him to continue actively holding it. It does not work for him to hire a manager, to manage it himself, to sell it outright, or even on an installment sale because...
Time out.
Yes?
I want to change where you're going. If you had been around, I probably would still own it.
If what? Wait, was around?
If you, Jen Rollins, one focus.
Why? What would I have done?
Probably still own it. Because you've got your act together. Remember I mentioned this guy, Phil Lopez?
Yeah.
You're like the East Coast Phil Lopez. Only better.
That's so nice.
Because you're in charge. Yes.
But how would that help it with a property in California and I'm just sitting over here in Pennsylvania?
No, if the property was in Pennsylvania and you were managing it, I would still own it. Most likely.
I understand. Or you could have, if you would like this idea, you could have 1031'd that money into assets directly owning in Pennsylvania. Sounds like that, like you could move to a market where you had management or whatever, right?
Right.
Yes.
Here is something nobody tells you when you're starting out in real estate investing. Your local bank isn't set up for what you're trying to do. If you're buying rentals, then you need a lender who actually understands rentals. That's why I refer clients to Lending One. They are a DSCR lender, which stands for Debt Service Coverage Ratio. And it means a few really important things for investors. The underwriting is quicker and easier. They don't care about your W-2 income. It's based on the income that the property produces. Their rates are competitive and they offer all the financing flavors you could need. Fixed to flip, fixed to rent, construction, bridge loans, permanent financing. They even have a portfolio program if you've already gotten started. I'm shopping my next deal with them, and several property managers and their clients that I know are using Lending One and are thrilled. And I want you to have the same access to lenders and experts that I have. Click the link in the show notes to get started working with Lending One. By using that affiliate link, they'll know you're working with me, and I may receive a commission that will support the show. Thank you.
Okay. So
I don't know if I would have gone that way, Jen, because I was so over this property.
Right. I can totally tell. And Sabrina, I want to ask you, you meet people in Walt's situation, right? Like the same way, right? Like holding it and just outright selling it do not offer them what they're looking for to yield like the investment that they've made. What's driving it? Like Walt has said, I was over this property. I didn't want to pay this big tax bill. What are people talking about that they're trying to accomplish with you?
I'm seeing a lot of the location being a prime factor in why people want to get rid of their properties. So it could be for the fact that the zoning changed and maybe they can't rent it as they intended to as a short-term rental, or the property has, gone down in value because of the neighborhood, and they still have a gain, or they're moving locations to get closer to their grandchildren or their children, and they don't want to manage a property that's far away. So those are some typical reasons. And also for, investors that are really movers and shakers and they're keeping an eye on all their things, they know when a property starts to, go down in the cash flow for them. So then they want to move to a more lucrative type of, investment property. So then they sort of move things around and they reshuffle their assets by doing an exchange, deferring the tax, being happy in their new property. And then 2 years later, they can make a decision if they want to continue in that same investment property or exchange into something else as long as it's been an investment property for the 2 years.
Yeah, and we'll get into the details of the 1031. But just another reason I hear people, I go to all kinds of events and, I'm out there saying like buy and hold forever and ever. There's no reason to sell. But Walt makes a very compelling argument here. This was not right for him. Something I hear people talking about is trying to 1031 or move out of what they consider assets that take too much active management. The assets I manage, single and small multifamily rentals, very active, very, like Walt. If you're a good landlord, you're in those properties, you're performing tasks, you're doing things. I hear people wanting to get into what they say is more passive. So whether that's a short-term rental that's out of town and managed by someone else, people seem to have a lot easier time putting short-term rentals into management than long-term rentals, just an observation. Moving into commercial, and even moving that money into like larger real estate partnerships where they're not the guy on the ground. So, that's interesting very much. And it sounds like, Walt, back to your options. So you're not selling it. You're not holding it. What comes next?
So I'm not doing an outright sale. I'm not doing an installment sale or a seller carryback. I looked at, Section 1031 exchanges, which I eventually did. I also looked at real estate investment trusts, or REIT.
Yeah.
That would be a 721 exchange, which is a one-way street. Once that's done, you can't move money again without tax consequences.
Sure.
What I would have liked is I would have liked an REIT or a REIT to come in and buy this thing from me. They're not going to do that. It's just chump change for them. They don't have the time.
Well, let's break it down why you're getting into this stuff, because here's the problem with the 1031 exchange, and Sabrina, help me out with this. This means Walt would be permitted to sell his 2-unit. However, he would have to take the income, the gain from that, and place it into a like-kind investment. So talk to me about what's available to him for like-kind investments for the guy who doesn't want to direct own apartments anymore.
Yeah, there's lots of different options for replacement properties in an exchange. And just to correct, you don't just have to reinvest the gain. You have to reinvest the value of the property you're selling minus the closing costs to get the full tax deferral on the exchange. So that's something people have a misconception about. They think, oh, I only have to reinvest my gain on the property or my profit. And that's, a misconception. You need to reinvest the debt and the equity in the property to maximize your tax deferral. But there are many different investments that you can get into that you don't necessarily have to manage yourself. So you can invest in any type of property that is going to be property held for business use or investment. It cannot be a personal residence. It cannot be a vacation home. It can't be partnership interests or stocks or bonds. So you want to invest in real property or things like oil and gas rights, conservation easements, cell towers, vacant land. There's all different ways you can go that it's not restrictive where if you sell a single family, you have to buy a single family. It's much more wide open than that.
So I understand you're asking the questions, but Sabrina just rattled off a whole bunch of interesting stuff there, cell phone towers and that kind of stuff. Could you give me that list again?
Do it.
There's more than that, but those are a few that are passive. You don't have to do a lot of management yourself because somebody else is managing those for you. But oil and gas rights, you can exchange. Conservation easements, people exchange those oftentimes. You can get into vacant land, even if you're selling a multifamily or a single family, if that's what you want to do and you don't want to do anything with that property, you just want it to sit and appreciate. There's billboards. We've done exchanges for billboards because of the fact that they're on property, so anything that's considered to be real property in the state that it's located in. So, there's mineral rights, many different types of properties like that. And actually, I have a huge list of that. If anybody ever wants it, I can certainly forward that to you, Walt.
Well, when you and I chatted about your journey in this, you and I kind of felt like, based on the way we understood the typical 1031 rules, that you could get into something in a new location, that you could get something maybe with better management, but truly in a regular 1031, it puts you right back where you were, is right? Kind of how you were thinking about it?
Well, I wanted to still have a real estate exposure. In the Bay Area, the primary benefit is the appreciation. So what I ended up getting into probably is not going to appreciate as much, but the risk is spread over many more properties in the REIT.
Okay.
In the DST, it's only what's in the DST package.
Before we get started on DSTs, I think what's really important, and Walt, you brought my attention to this, is that these investments are on the private marketplace, which means they're restricted to accredited investors. And we're not going to go through all the different ways you can qualify as an accredited investor here today, but you can easily Google that. But the purpose essentially of restricting this to accredited investors, and by the way, all the things that qualify you, means that you have a lot of money. It means you either have significant net worth, you make a lot of active income, or you hold roles that mean you should be savvier than the average investor. This is all about protecting the normal American consumer. So if you don't qualify as an accredited investor, these DSTs are not available to you because they are risky, right? They are run by people, and there's all different kinds of people and companies running these. Very good things to think about before we get into this, that if you're not an accredited investor, you're really restricted to the first 4 options on Walt's list, right? Keep it, have a manager, sell it, seller finance, or just a typical 1031 exchange. Those are not restricted from non-accredited investors. But once you start playing with DSTs, now we're getting into an accredited investor territory. So before we move on, you mentioned REITs as like the thing you liked the most. You liked REITs. I just want to detail what a REIT is for folks. It's REIT, stands for Real Estate Investment Trust. And if you're familiar with the concept of a mutual fund, right? I buy a share in a mutual fund, and that mutual fund owns shares of many different companies, and they could be segmented by property or by company type, by company location, sector, whatever. In the case of real estate, this is a REIT could own Boston real estate. It could own Class A office in major metros. It could it could do hospitality. A lot of them are, you can get into all different kinds of exact stuff, but a lot of them are diversified, and they're really great ways to own real estate without being the person collecting the rent or talking about the roof. Just like when you own Google stock, nobody at the REIT's going to call you up and go, "Hey, Walt, the roof on warehouse A is leaking again. Are we replacing or repairing?" Nope. Professionals are making all those decisions. And what's so great about REITs, folks, we're not talking about just the passivity and exposure to real estate. You avoid double taxation. So when you own a share of corporate stock, you are being taxed twice on every dollar of those earnings. Well, how does that work? Well, when Google issues you a share and they make money, Google pays tax on their money. What's left over in terms of profit gets distributed to shareholders. Shareholders then pay tax on their tax return. For a REIT share, no tax is paid at the corporate level. The REIT does not pay taxes on that income. It is then distributed to you, the shareholder, the investor, and you pay taxes on it on your annual tax return. Now, the other thing is the government says, REITs, you can have this special classification. That's fine, but you're going to distribute 95% of the free cash flow each and every year. Why? Because the government needs their hands on their take. It needs to get to the investor so they can get their taxes. And so this is a high yield, real estate diversified way, super passive, and you avoid double taxation. So I understand why Walt saw that and went, that sounds like the perfect thing for me. But the problem is, Walt, you mentioned the only way to truly 1031 into a REIT would be if the REIT wanted to buy your property directly. And then you could take those proceeds. Am I right? The proceeds of that sale, the REIT says, here's a big check for your property, Walt. And then you would turn around and purchase REIT stock with it. Is that the legal way to do that?
Well, yeah, you mentioned 1031. My understanding is the only way you can do this is with a 721 exchange, which is a one-way street. A 1031, say, for example, you bought a DST, and usually they have a shelf life of 7 to 10 years. At the end of that 10 years, the DST cashes out, that money goes to a qualified intermediary, and you buy something else with it, either another DST or some real property.
When somebody wants to 1031, is there a direct route into a REIT not through the DST? If the REIT purchases the
A REIT
property?
would not qualify as replacement property in 1031 exchange directly because it is not real property. You're buying stocks essentially, or, an ownership in the REIT as opposed to buying real property. So usually what happens is it goes into a typical type of DST, which is real property. You're buying a fractional interest, and then the DST gets contributed to the REIT at the end of the period that they determine. The brokers of that DST contributed to the REIT, and now you are an investor in the REIT as opposed to a person who directly owns real property.
Maybe Sabrina could clarify this. So I ended up with 2 UPREITs, umbrella partnership real estate investment trusts. And basically that is marketed as a DST. And at least 2 years after the last beneficial owner buys into that DST, the umbrella program REIT has an option to buy that asset at its current net asset value. And I understand the way it's marketed that way. If they said for sure they're going to do it, then it's not a 1031 exchange anymore when you bought the DST. So you kind of hope that they're going to do it. And in my case, they did.
Something that's important to note with a 1031 exchange also, just like Walt said, is your intent when you purchase the property. So if you buy a property and you intend to sell it immediately afterwards or within a very short period of time, and your intention is not to hold it for business use or investment, it can be questionable as far as a replacement property goes, because you're supposed to have a hold period between 1 and 2 tax years that you're going to show rental income and expenses, as opposed to buying something, maybe a piece of land, building a house on it, and 7 months later selling it, knowing that from the beginning of the purchase of the property. So the IRS will look at your intent with the property and how you report it on your tax return and what you did subsequently to buying it in an exchange or trying to exchange that property when you bought it with that intention.
Okay. So you can't take real owned property and go into a REIT. There's no way to do that. And so this intermediary step that you used is called a Delaware Statutory Trust.
Right, because you're not buying real property as a replacement property in an exchange. That's actually a fractional ownership in real property, and then that DST property gets contributed to the REIT.
So if Walt's end goal is to get into a REIT with the proceeds from this duplex, and there's no way, because it's not a like-kind investment when he buys shares in that REIT, what Walt did that's so great here, and he's sharing with us, is the road he took to get there. And the intermediary step that is involved is something called a Delaware Statutory Trust. And I'm going to make some comparisons here to the stages he had. So as you know, in the beginning, in 2022, he's so upset with his 2-unit that he direct owns and has responsibility for. He doesn't want to be in that situation. A Delaware Statutory Trust is like a syndication. So if you are aware of a syndication where many people direct own a portfolio of properties, so Walt's part of a business entity that owns these properties, right? That is the Delaware Statutory Trust. That's the intermediary step that he 1031s his property into. And then we'll talk about this in some detail. After a period of ownership, that DST can then get essentially sold or absorbed into the REIT, allowing Walt to now have his shares in the REIT. Before we get too far into this, Sabrina, why are Delaware Statutory Trusts all based in Delaware?
Well, that I don't know. I don't know what the history of that is, but I know that they buy properties all around the country. So you're not limited to being there, but they set up the initial Delaware Statutory Trust there, probably for tax purposes, I would imagine. But the structure that used to be utilized was the tenant in common structure. So back in the day, 2008, I don't even want to talk about that time, but there was tenant in common interests that were very similarly set up this way, where you could buy into a property or a grouping of properties for a fractional interest. And that's essentially what you're doing in a Delaware Statutory Trust, but it's a better setup than what the TIC situation was before. There were several reasons, and problems with that back in the day. That's not my level of expertise. Why? But the DST is kind of what took over that and took that place of that. So you could buy into a Delaware Statutory Trust that is a big assisted living facility, or you could buy into a Delaware Statutory Trust that's a grouping of 11 properties all around the country, and you now own a fractional interest in the real property of those 11 properties. So they're varying different types of investments you can get into. Some of the obligations are anywhere from 2 years all the way up to 10 years. They all differ. So you can kind of select what you like better. And then in a DST, a Delaware Statutory Trust, if you're in that investment, you can exchange out of it because you own real property.
It's really attractive to somebody like Walt because now he has been able to 1031 his direct ownership in the 2 unit into a fractional interest in this group of properties. So that's a like-kind investment. But now there's a company full of Jens and Pauls and property managers doing all these things for him professionally across the portfolio and being rewarded appropriately. And it sounds like he didn't have to do a DST, but the thing that the DST offers, and this is what you were getting into, the hold periods and how they're often set up kind of by REITs. So this is where it gets a little bit complicated, right? Because Walt has ownership in a fractional ownership in this real estate. As you said, he can still 1031 out. He's not stuck, right? He hasn't paid the tax man. He's passive, but he really wants to be in that REIT. And so it sounds like to me, several of these REITs within the same group of companies also run these DSTs, right? So they're through the DST putting together groups of property, running and operating them for, as you said, various stated hold periods. No guarantees are made that the DST would be, what's the term? Absorbed or bought by the REIT. There's no guarantees of that, but in Walt's case, it happened. And explain to me how now, as you mentioned, it's one way. Once Walt converts through the 721 exchange, his shares of the DST into the REIT, he now can't trade out of that. Is that just a special exemption that allows him to take kind of one final step in the 1031 exchange world? What is that?
People ask me all the time, what do I use? What do I have in my desk, my office, my truck? What do I give new property managers on their first day at work? So I built an Amazon store. It's the actual things I use, the books I read that shaped my opinion on this business, and the tools I use every day and tell my clients to buy. If it's one of my best tips or tricks and it's available on Amazon, it's in that storefront. Check it out. The link is in the podcast description. And if you buy something, I will make a small commission. So that supports the show. Thank you.
Well, he can't do an exchange out of the real estate investment trust because now he doesn't own real property. He owns stocks or investments in that REIT. So he no longer owns real property for investment. And so now he cannot do a 1031 exchange because it is not considered to be real property.
And I guess this section 721 was designed specifically to create a way to get people to be able to 1031 into stocks out of real property?
I'm not certain that all the investors in the DST are necessarily doing a 1031 exchange, so that may or may not be true. It could be just a different type of passive investment vehicle where people want to still be in real estate, but they don't want to manage properties.
What's your impression, Walt, from the research you did about this section 721 and its purpose and applicability? What do you think?
Well, I have to say the section 1031 and DSTs, I did a whole lot of reading on and was very impressed by the process. 721, the only thing I needed to know is a one-way street, and that's about as far as I got. So hopefully Sabrina can save us because I'm not the savior here.
I totally get it. Sabrina, talk to me a little bit about the process. And you've shared this with my groups before, and you were talking before we went on today about you have a timeline calculator. You call it the 45 to 180 day calculator. So most people who know about 1031s know that you have different timelines in which to comply. It's a very advantageous section of our tax code, but there are timelines. And so at the end of this episode or in the description, you can find Sabrina's contact information. Reach out to her for that. But talk to me about those timelines and when you want to meet an investor. So let's pretend Walt was going to do a very typical 1031, very normal, nothing crazy. When would you have wanted to meet Walt in this decision-making process and help him?
Well, knowing Walt's situation and how he was dissatisfied with his property, he was probably thinking about this way before he was actually going to sell it. So that would be a good time to call and bat around ideas and say, here's what my goal is. This is what I'm thinking down the road that I want to do. And then we can assist with how the exchange would fit into that scenario, following the rules, of course, and the guidelines, but also helping you get to your investment goal. So because you could take several steps in an exchange to get where you want to be. So maybe Walt wanted to sell that property, but didn't initially want to go into the 721 route into a REIT. Maybe he wanted to buy a couple of other properties and do a couple exchanges and do better each time. So each time he doesn't pay tax on the property he's selling, by doing an exchange, he's deferring that tax, and then he's rolling that money into the next property. So each time he could increase the value and the quality of the new property that he's buying, or he can split it up into more than one property. Those are options. So in a 1031 exchange, anywhere along the process, you can get in touch with us to ask questions, but it's better to plan ahead, especially if you're not sure exactly what you want to do, or you do have a very specific idea of what you want to do down the road, because we can help you achieve that. So I have people that call me sitting at the closing table, which is probably not ideal if you don't know what you're doing, and, as far as in properties and what you're going to reinvest in. And I have people that call me a year ahead of time. So, that can happen either way. But, setting it up with your tax advisor, having them involved, asking questions, brainstorming a little bit is very helpful to get you where you want to be and utilize the exchange to your best benefit.
Yeah, the call from the closing table has to be one of the worst ideas. And you said it very politely. It's probably not the best idea. I'll say it really frankly. It's a bad freaking idea. You are not going to be able to use the program, very likely. And I find that to be very common, Sabrina. I don't know about you, but people talk to me about their real estate. And I ask, whenever somebody says, oh, I'm selling, and they're not old, I go, what are you doing with that money? And they'll bring up that they're going to 1031 it into another asset. And then I start asking them, who are you working with? Have you identified the new thing, the new assets? And they're giving me answers that tell me they're not actually going to be successful with this. How often are you finding, I don't know, you're at a company that manages, so if they get with you, you kind of get them in the stream and fix them. But are you finding that people aren't managing this well and then finding out too late that they haven't done it correctly?
Yes, we actually get quite a few calls of people who have already closed on their properties before engaging the services of a qualified intermediary such as ourselves. So if you don't have the exchange set up before you close and you receive any money, it becomes immediately taxable when you sell that property. You can't go back and do an exchange. Then we have others who they close on their property and they think that in the middle of the, the situation where they're getting ready to buy, they can just sort of declare to the air, I'm doing a 1031 exchange and then buy that property. And that's not the way it works. So, I'm like, you can't just tell people, that you're doing it. You have to actually take the steps to set up the exchange and follow the rules. So that's where, Jen, the timelines come in. So the first deadline starts on the day of closing. So when you convey the property that you're selling and you have the exchange in place before closing, your countdown starts to the day 45 deadline. And what that means is on day 45, you have to submit a list of properties that you're interested in purchasing unambiguously. And that means writing down the addresses, the tax map number, whatever identifying information you have regarding that property. You can't just say, I'm buying a property in such and such complex. It has to be number 108 in the complex. So then once you go beyond your day 45 and you've submitted your list, you have 180 days from the closing of the property you sold to actually purchase one or more of those identified properties. And that's how you would complete a perfect 1031 exchange. So you have several options to identify. There's a couple of rules to follow when you're identifying properties. And I can go into that further if you want to down the road. But once you identify, you need to buy something from that list within 180 days to complete the transaction. And that's how, it works perfectly in that situation.
Well, and the thing that I think isn't often talked about, and maybe why people don't understand you need an intermediary, is the money can't touch the investor's bank account. And if it does, now taxes are due. So let's just pretend, using Walt as our example here, if Walt did a transaction and sold his 2 unit and he was going to do a 1031 exchange, those proceeds would have had to go immediately to the intermediary that he had selected and was working with, and would sit there until redeployed. And then what happens if he did not deploy all of those proceeds by the end of that 180 days? Would it just be, here's your money, Walt, less the taxes you owe? Like, how does that work?
He would file that on his tax return for the year that he received the funds. So it's not necessarily when he started the exchange.
The intermediary sends them the balance that wasn't redeployed back. Okay.
Exactly.
And then in that case, he would have only used the tax savings on the part he redeployed into like-kind investments. The part he took, he would owe taxes on. So he would do the best he could to redeploy all that money and so on.
Back to the timeline, the reason somebody would want to plan ahead, like we were talking about at the beginning, the reason we have the calculator on our website is because once that clock starts ticking for the day 45, that's kind of the most difficult time because you got to get something on that form that you think you can buy. So a lot of people, they ask me this question: what if I list 3 properties and I can't close on any of those? Or what if something happens? Can I write another one down on that list? Well, no, the IRS called it a deadline for a reason. It is a deadline and it is firm. It is one of those things in 1031 exchanges that is black and white. And the only way the deadlines change is unless there's a federally declared disaster area and there's an extension that is issued by the IRS.
Got it. Walt, I wonder, because you're through it now. Your DST went into the, as you said, 2 different UPREITs. You've gone down the one-way street. You're sitting in the cul-de-sac. You own the shares. Now, these shares you could liquidate. You could sell, I'm sure. You could just hold them, and then when you eventually pass, they would go to your heirs, right? That's kind of the 2 ways this could go. You sell and pay tax on your proceeds at that time.
Yes,
or
I think there's also a step up. I think if it goes to the heirs, there's also a step up in basis.
And that was kind of what I was getting to here, that it's my guess, because of all this that you went through, you plan to pass this on, would be the intention. And that is a tremendous amount of value. You know, that property that you inherited, got the step up basis, had a huge amount of earnings on. You now pass along into this other asset, no tax payments, and because it was very hefty for you coming out of California, now your heir gets a step up basis when they do receive those stocks. I think you've done an incredible job of preservation of wealth and value in this. I mean, how does it feel having gone through it? Is it what you imagined?
Oh yeah. I'm really happy about the whole process. It was a 4-year process. I sold in May of 2022. The transaction cost for that was 5%. That went to a QI. That QI put it into 2 DSTs, which were part of an UPREIT. That was in June of 2022. Both DSTs had converted to REITs by January of 2026. And so what I have is REIT operating partnership units. And my cash on cash when I had that duplex was 2.8%. Part of that was lowered because that was a 5-year average I took. Part of that was brought down because I had that vacancy, because I had that property manager number 2 that messed it up. However, now my cash on cash is 4.8%. So my net income is 1.45x. And I do nothing. Nobody has a clogged toilet and is going to call me at 2 a.m. Every quarter, there's a transfer into an account at a bank.
Absolutely.
My future plan with this is let it run for a couple of years to understand what the implications are for income. Go to a CPA and get him to help me understand how to manage my tax brackets and request redemptions from each of the REITs in that amount so I can slowly pull cash out at a lower tax rate. So it's better than this installment sale, because in any given year, depending on my tax situation, I can request a redemption. Will I get the redemption? Maybe, maybe not. Typically, these REITs do not hold a lot of cash, and you don't want them to, because you want them.
What's a redemption? What do people need to know? What's a redemption?
That's basically selling your operating partnership unit back to the REIT.
Yeah. So cashing out
So
your
they buy it
share,
from you.
which you can only do to the REIT itself. You can't share your shares, sell your shares to me?
I don't know. I didn't explore that market because from what I understand about these two REITs, the redemptions would fall that I could have fall within the range I would want. So they are fungible. There may be some sort of market for them. I don't think it's very robust. It's not like, you call up your broker and say, hey, I want to sell my whatever. It's not that
Right.
fungible.
So any regrets, Walt? Anything you do different?
At this point, no regrets. Maybe I should be having some, but I have none. I like it. It's
I
steady.
heard,
It's
though,
steady income.
yeah, I heard when Sabrina was
It's
talking about the variety of passive alternatives for real property in 1031s, I feel like I heard your ears tick up. That maybe if you'd seen a list like that, you might have been more tempted by something like that. Did I read that right or no?
no. What she mentioned was a seller carryback combined with 1031 exchanges. The buyer would not give me the money. They would give the money to a QI, and that would be invested in a 1031. Have I got that right, Sabrina?
Generally speaking, yeah, you nailed it down. But there's another way to utilize it where if you're doing seller financing and you want to buy the note, so you want to include that cash that you may receive at a future time. So you have a note between you and your buyer of your property. What we can do is set up what's called a QI note structure. And that's where we would hold the note between the buyer and 1031 Corp as the
Excellent.
QI. And then you could purchase the note from 1031 Corp and include that cash in the exchange to use the full value towards the full tax deferral in the exchange. And then you would receive payments over time, with a certain structure for the installments later on. But you could utilize that money if you're able to either borrow it to buy the note or use your own cash to buy the note. So that's a great option in that situation where you're doing seller financing.
Wow.
What I'm learning from this discussion, Walt, with Sabrina is you cannot go about any one of these things without getting great advice early. Because what I'm hearing, every single time we come up with, well, this wouldn't work, Sabrina's like, well, there is this way. And, people with money will always find a way to avoid giving it to the government. And Lord knows I'm a supporter of that too. I'm a good American. But wow, this is complicated. And for, regular buy and hold investors, the kind of people I talk to, people like Walt, like he had this property, but this wasn't, his career. He had a very, a whole different career. He's an expert in a whole different thing. Wowie zowie. I mean, I'm doing this all day long and I'm just getting truth bombs dropped on me left and right in this call. I mean, Sabrina, you could just spend all your time probably telling people how this works.
Well, actually, now that you said that, something else that came up in Walt's discussion when he was talking, or you were talking about the step up in basis. Okay. So an investor in a 1031 exchange, when they're buying and selling all these properties and they get down to a certain point. So let's say they get to be older and they want to get out of the business of, taking care of properties and that. So they've been exchanging all these years, each time selling a property, buying a better property or more properties or, increasing their wealth, preserving their equity, getting a nice portfolio of properties. And then they say, okay, I'm ready to retire. I don't want to do this anymore. And they have 5 properties. Let's say they're valued at $6 million. And they say, okay, I want to retire into a beautiful home on the coast of North Carolina. They can buy a beautiful investment home and rent it out for the first 2 years of ownership, limit their personal use in the first 2 years of ownership, and then move into it as their retirement home or their primary residence. And when their heirs inherit that property, they get it at the step up in basis. So all that gain goes away for their heirs.
Wow. Wow, wow, wow. I had these ideas of what 1031s are and what they can do. So this has been very, very enlightening. Sabrina, is there anything that we didn't cover that you think, gosh, I just really want to make sure they hear about this while I have their attention?
Well, I think, back on the note about the retirement home is one of the jokes, like kind of the terms we use in the industry is defer, and then die. So your funds keep going and, increasing and improving, and then you hand it down to your heirs. So I thought that was funny to mention because it sort of makes you think, continue to exchange. Now in a REIT, you're not able to do that. Once you hit the REIT, you put the brakes on exchanging and on deferring that tax. And as Walt said, there may be another way to, defer tax on that type of investment. But in the 1031 exchange with the properties, even if you didn't buy a retirement home and you had investment properties, your heirs would still get it at a step up in basis. And a lot of people sometimes make the mistake of gifting their properties to their children. And what happens in that case is they may be gifting their children not only the property, but the gain. So if their children inherit the property, then they can defer that gain. They get it at the current fair market value when the property is passed to them. So that's something really important to know. And also, back to what you were saying, getting the advice of a good tax or legal advisor when you're entering into any type of investing in a real estate investment trust or a DST or a 1031 exchange, and getting your ducks sort of in a row with those people and having them with you to hold your hand the whole time, because your tax advisor is the person that's going to be signing off on your tax return. And if anything would be questioned in what you did and what happened with your investment properties or how your exchange went, they're going to be the one defending your tax return. And they need to have their reasons, and they need to be well informed on what your plan is, what your intention is. As I mentioned before about the intention with your properties, they're aware of all that. So they're going to be in your corner defending you for what you need or standing up for your reasons for doing what you did and helping you get to your end goal. So that's always good advice.
Thank you so much to both of you, Walt and Sabrina, for joining me. Walt, I know we're not even sharing your last name or anything. You're not interested in hearing from us. But listen, if you email me a question directly, I'll make sure it gets to Walt. And if he feels like answering it, he might. But you should be getting a hold of Sabrina Richards. Listen, she's at 1031 Corp. The website is real easy, 1031corp.com. That's where you're going to find various resources, including that timeline calculator. And then if you check the description on this podcast, whether you're finding it on YouTube, Apple, Spotify, anywhere, you're going to see her phone number, extension, and email address. And I encourage you, her business card sits on my bulletin board right next to my chair in my office, and it has 1,000 pinholes in it because I'm always pulling it down, typing it into an email or telling somebody on the phone, because these are the conversations I'm having with people, right? And I'm trying to make sure they don't get too far along in this and can't do it. So I try to get them to Sabrina just as soon as possible. And in case you forgot, the disclaimer here is this is education, not advice. Walt's story made a lot of sense for Walt and Walt's life and his needs. You don't need to take it as the template for yours, unless you are in fact Walt, and then, get out of that other dimension and come join us over here. All right, guys. Now listen, I'm going to end the same way I always end, even though this whole episode was about how not to do this, but we're going to buy and hold forever and ever. Amen. Until next time.
You know what's better than building generational wealth? Not a damn thing. And obviously the best way to do that is through buy and hold real estate. But let's be real, managing your properties yourself, that's a one-way ticket to burnout. This is supposed to be an investment, not a burden. At One Focus Property Management, we don't just manage your properties, we make buy and hold real estate actually work. We handle everything: tenant screening, maintenance, rent collection, you name it. All you do is watch your portfolio and net worth grow. We make sure you never even think about quitting real estate investing, because the secret to buy and hold is to hold it for a very long time. And you can't do that when you sell every time you have a problem. We're the biggest, baddest property management team in Lycoming, Clinton, Northumberland, Montour, and Columbia counties. And we do it all to give you more protection, less work, and absolutely no drama. So let's turn your rental properties into wealth-building machines. Learn more at onefocuspm.com. That's onefocuspm.com.